The Bible is a treasure of dramatic stories, moral lessons, and intriguing mysteries. One such story is the tale of Joseph, Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife. But over the centuries, some interpretations of this narrative have gone far beyond the plain text of Genesis. Here's the burning question: did Potiphar, the powerful Egyptian officer, undergo a gender transformation during the events surrounding Joseph? Buckle up, because this deep dive into the mystery of the Bible is going to have you questioning everything you think you knew. Joseph, Jacob's favored son, had a really bad beginning to life. In Genesis 37, his jealous brothers sold him into slavery, and he was taken to Egypt, where he was purchased by Potiphar, Pharaoh's captain of the guard. Potiphar was a man of important rank. The Bible presents him as an officer of Pharaoh. That is, he was placed with the responsibility of maintaining care and security of the ruler of Egypt. Joseph's story in Potiphar's house starts off pretty great. Potiphar was so fast to discern Joseph's ability and entrusted him with managing his house. In Genesis 39, 6-7, the plot thickens. Potiphar's wife is introduced as an unnamed character who plays a pivotal role in Joseph's story. She becomes infatuated with Joseph and tries to seduce him. Despite Joseph's denial, she is not deterred, and as soon as Joseph continues to deny it, she accuses him of rape. And so he went into prison for a reason falsely given. At first instance, the narrative seems plain and simple. Potiphar's wife is a bad woman, Joseph a righteous servant of God, and Potiphar a mere bystander between the two. Historians, however, put forward some complications in this image. The debate as to the sex of Potiphar finds origin in both linguistic ambiguities and historical context. There exist interpretations among Jews of some portions of text using the term for Potiphar, Potiphara. While sounding female in its etymology, scholars question this figure as something far from traditional thought and tradition. Moreover, the ancient world and Egyptian society often depicted gender roles and identities in ways that do not align with modern expectations. For example, Egyptian mythology features gods and figures who are transforming their genders, or who both present masculine and feminine qualities. Could this cultural setting influence the interpretation of Potiphar's character? Some scholars claim that these interpretations reflect more about the commentators' societies than the biblical text itself. The Bible uniformly describes Potiphar as male, and there is no indication in the Genesis account of any gender transformation. The concept of a change in gender may also derive from interpretations found in the Talmud and other extra-biblical sources. Jewish tradition often develops the story to bring out the moral or theological lesson to be learned. In some accounts, Potiphar is a eunuch, or one whose masculinity was compromised. Why? One reason is that the fact of Potiphar's wife's conduct reflects badly on her husband. In ancient cultures, a wife's adultery could sometimes be interpreted as a commentary on her husband's failure to keep his household in order. To preserve the dignity of Potiphar, interpreters may have concluded that he was impotent, or at least unable to perform his marital obligations, perhaps on medical or biological grounds. These interpretations, however, are not grounded in the text of Genesis itself. They're later additions that reflect the values and concerns of the societies that produced them. Now let's return to the source. Genesis 39 clearly identifies Potiphar as a male officer of Pharaoh. The text emphasizes his authority, his trust in Joseph, and his reaction to his wife's accusation. When Potiphar hears his wife's claim, he becomes angry and has Joseph imprisoned. There is no indication within the text that Potiphar's gender or identity has any impact on the story. It seems to focus on the faithful life of Joseph towards God, his refusal not to sin, and how unjust he is treated with false accusations. So where does this put the theory about Potiphar's gender transformation? That's an extra-biblical idea without a basis in the scriptural account. The story of Joseph in Potiphar's house is about so much more than the deeds of Potiphar or his wife. It's a story of divine providence, resilience, and faith. When falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph continues to trust God. This theme is developed in Genesis 39:21-23. But the Lord was with Joseph. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Even in the darkest moments, God's hand is evident in Joseph's life. His time in prison became a stepping stone to his ultimate rise to power in Egypt. If the Bible doesn't support the idea of Potiphar's gender transformation, why does this theory continue to intrigue people? One reason is the human fascination with mysteries and alternate interpretations. Stories that challenge traditional understandings often capture our attention, even if they lack evidence. Additionally, the cultural and historical contexts of biblical interpretation play a role. As societies evolve, so do the ways they read and understand ancient texts. To some, it is an interesting way of understanding the Bible, while to others, it is a reminder of sticking closely to the text. Linguistically, the confusion surrounding the identity of Potiphar arises because the name means, in the Hebrew, is masculine and decidedly Egyptian, and thus connects one directly with the sun, god Ra. However, in Genesis 41:45, when Joseph married Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, the coincidence of names leads to controversy. Is Potiphar the same as Potiphar, or are they different? Although most scholars have concluded they are different, the coincidence has sparked centuries of speculation. Some ancient commentators speculated that the shift from Potiphar to Potiphera could imply a change in status, role, or even identity. But linguistic evidence and context suggest otherwise. Potiphera is explicitly identified as a priest, a role entirely separate from Potiphar's position as captain of the guard. This distinction highlights the dangers of overinterpreting names without considering their cultural and textual contexts. Egyptian gods like Atum and Hapi were shown with aspects of both masculine and feminine, representing a balance of both creative and generative forces. Pharaohs, too, at times could use gender-blended symbols, such as the combination of male crowns with traditionally female clothing, to stress their divinity. These cultural practices may have influenced later interpretations of Potiphar's story. Although the Bible presents Potiphar as a fairly transparent character, ancient readers who were familiar with Egyptian culture might have read further layers into his identity. This, however, reflects cultural projection rather than biblical intent. Beyond the issues of gender, there are other deeper issues concerning power and identity that emerge from Potiphar's role in the story of Joseph. A high-ranking officer, he had great influence, but was finally dominated by his wife's false accusations. Here, then, is the fragility of human authority compared to divine sovereignty. The reaction of Potiphar to his wife's accusations is telling. Genesis 39:19. When his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. How interesting that the text is silent on whether he had anger towards Joseph or at his wife. Some commentators feel that perhaps Potiphar, seeing the character of Joseph and suspecting his wife's dishonesty, is trapped by societal expectations. This ambiguity gives depth to Potiphar's character. He is no longer a one-dimensional antagonist, but rather a figure torn between personal conviction and public duty, a theme that echoes across the ages. One of the most persistent extra-biblical interpretations of Potiphar's identity comes from Jewish midrash. In these texts, Potiphar is sometimes described as a eunuch, a man who, due to castration or other circumstances, could not fulfill certain traditional roles. This theory is derived from the Hebrew word saris, which can be understood to mean both officer and eunuch. Although saris is applied to Potiphar, its context in Genesis 39 clearly leads one to interpret it more specifically as officer rather than eunuch. However, this double meaning was rich soil for commentators of later eras to make assumptions regarding Potiphar's maleness and its impact on the narrative. Why would such a theory develop? In part, it reflects an attempt to reconcile the behavior of Potiphar's wife with societal expectations. If Potiphar were a eunuch, his wife's actions could be seen as a desperate attempt to fulfill her own needs, rather than sheer immorality. However, this interpretation is speculative and not supported by the biblical text. In the midst of these debates, it is imperative not to lose sight of the overall message of the story, the faith and integrity of Joseph. Amid a situation loaded with temptation, betrayal, and injustice, Joseph steadfastly holds on to his commitment to God. This moral clarity cuts in stark contrast to the ambiguity in the case of Potiphar and his wife, whose actions are driven by self-centeredness and deception. On the other hand, Joseph's choices reflect the better standard that leads him to vindication and success. Why has this story of Joseph and Potiphar lived on as a favorite in the pages of the Bible? One good reason is the timeless theme, the conflict between integrity and compromise, the fate of false accusations, and divine justice victorious. In a world where truth often gives way to power and perception, Joseph is a good example of how important it is to stand up for one's beliefs. His story is also full of hope for those facing injustice. The story demonstrates that God's plans are bigger than any human plan. In fact, the notion that Potiphar transformed into a woman due to his encounter with Joseph is a myth based on misapprehension. Of course, it adds glamour to the story, but it deviates from its core message. The Bible is clear about the representation of Potiphar as a male officer and his wife as the instigator of Joseph's trials. Other extra-biblical theories about gender or identity are interesting but not supported by the text, and should at best be considered speculative. In the end, the story of Joseph and Potiphar is not about gender transformations or speculative interpretations. It is about integrity, faith, and the sovereignty of God. Joseph's refusal to give in to temptation, even at great personal cost, is a powerful example of righteousness. The theories about Potiphar's gender may be intriguing, but they distract from the true message of the story. The Bible teaches us to focus on what matters, trusting in God, standing firm in our convictions, and believing that even in the darkest times, He is working for our good. What do you think about this theory? Does it add an interesting layer to the story, or does it take us away from the Bible's central message? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into biblical mysteries, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content.